Senator Cormann.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. The role of Parliament is to scrutinise, well, one of the core responsibilities of Parliament is to scrutinise the activities and performance of executive government, in particular the way executive government spends public money. And the Senate, of course, has got a very particular responsibility in relation to that. And we've got significant responsibilities indeed under our Constitution, and over the last 108 years the Senate practices and procedures have developed to ensure that the Senate is a very effective institution helping to hold executive government to account. Now, one of the core requirements for us to be able to do our job as senators in this chamber is that we can ask questions of government, and we are entitled to expect answers. We are able to ask for documents that are held by government, and we are entitled indeed to get access to those documents. The default position should be that if in the context of Senate committee inquiries a question is asked of a public official or of a minister, that the minister will answer that question or he will provide a particular document that's being asked for. That is the default position. Unless there is a justifiable and specified public interest ground as to why it would not be in the public interest for the minister or that public official to provide either access to that information or access to that document. Now, there has been a lot of confusion for the time that I've been in this place, whether it was confected confusion or real confusion, as to how some of these past procedures and principles of the Senate were to be applied in the context of Senate inquiries. Indeed, ministers have been confused, officials have been confused, and chairs of Senate committees have been confused when the issue was raised that if an official declines to provide access to a particular piece of information, then he has to first point to a recognised public interest ground and has to make a statement of the reasons as to why it would not be in the public interest for that particular information to be provided. Now, the purpose of the motion passed by the Senate on the 13th of May was to set out very clearly the process to be followed by ministers and officials when they are in a position where they want to decline to provide access to information because they think that it might not be in the public interest for that information to be provided. And of course, there have been, over the last 108 years, a number of recognised public interest grounds that have developed, and I just read them back into the record. They include that essentially, if there is a prejudice to legal proceedings, if there is prejudice to law enforcement investigations, a damage to commercial interests, unreasonable invasion of privacy, disclosure of Executive Council or Cabinet deliberations, prejudice to national security or defence, prejudice to Australia's international relations, prejudice to relations between the Commonwealth and states, then if there is any of these, then the government may be able to claim proper public interest immunity as a reason not to provide access to a particular piece of information. The problem is that ministers and officers have continued to refuse to provide information to Senate committees without properly raising claims of public interest immunity, and indeed chairs of committees, chairs of Senate committees have not always been as enthusiastic as what they should have been in enforcing that particular requirement. And I'm just going to reflect on some of the experiences that I've had myself and point to one other experience. During Senate estimates, I asked an official from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet whether advice had been provided to the Prime Minister in relation to the Alcopops tax measure. I was given a number, and in a particular period of time, 7 pieces of advice had been provided. I asked whether that advice had been part of the Cabinet deliberations or whether it was a routine advice to government. It was not part of the Cabinet deliberations. Okay, so there is one public interest ground that was excluded. The question then was, can we have access to copies of that advice? The answer was no. It was ultimately taken on notice. Still, no answer has been provided to this day, and no reason has been given as to why it is not in the public interest for the Senate, for the Senate committees, to be given access to that information. I mean, I asked Senator Faulkner, who allegedly is in favour of openness and transparency in government, what the recognised public interest ground was. Why is it not in the public interest for the Senate to be given access to that particular piece of advice? And he wasn't able to point to any, and he didn't even try. He didn't even try. And the reality is, I mean, the question arises: is it sort of, would it put our national security at risk Is there an infringement, or would it prejudice legal proceedings, law enforcement investigations? Which one is it? There isn't one. And of course, I had a much worse experience with Senator Conroy. There's quite a serious issue at play here, and I really urge every individual senator to reflect on this quite carefully. The Leader of the Opposition announced in his budget reply speech an alternative savings model to take the place of the broken promise on the private health insurance rebate. The Leader of the Opposition quite constructively and positively proposed that the excise on tobacco should be increased by 12.5%. Now, clearly, the government sought advice from Treasury on that, and as part of a political exercise, that Treasury advice was released to the media on the 17th of May. And the media spontaneously goes out and reports it, and essentially the purpose was to discredit the very constructive and positive alternative proposal made by the Leader of the Opposition. When we asked questions in Senate estimates whether we could have access as a Senate committee to a copy of that same advice, we were told first no, it was taken on notice, and to this day it has not been provided. I think that it's a complete disregard of the Senate. If a copy of a piece of advice can be handed to the media, what possible public interest can there be for that same piece of advice and a copy of that same piece of advice not to be provided to a Senate committee which is there to scrutinise the activities and performance of the government and which is there to scrutinise whether the public expenditure is appropriately affected. Now, I'll just point you to one more example before sort of concluding my remarks, and that is Senator Cormann asked a question of Dr. Ken Henry. When did you first become aware? When did you first become aware of the government's infamous $43 billion national broadband network plan? He refused to answer the question, following which Senator Bushby asked very sensibly and in complete compliance with the order passed on the 13th of May whether he was claiming public interest immunity, and if so, which ground are you basing your public interest immunity claim on, and give us a statement of reasons. He said, no, I'm not claiming public interest immunity, I'm just not answering your question, without giving any sort of reason whatsoever. This is complete arrogance. This is not the open and transparent government that we were promised by the Rudd government before the last election. This is secretive government. This is secretive government at its worst, and it's fair to say that senior ministers in this government and officials obviously being protected by senior ministers in this government are treating this Senate and the Senate committee system with complete disregard, dare I say, with contempt. And I really urge all senators to have a very close look at the report of the Procedures Committee. Clearly, it was never the expectation that a very bad culture that has entrenched in this current government of not wanting to reveal information would be changed overnight. I believe that this order that we passed on the 13th of May will continue to work and will continue to hopefully encourage officials and ministers to reflect very carefully on their obligations to be accountable to the Senate and through the Senate to the Australian people. And I would suggest that the Clerk of the Senate be asked and be required to make regular reports on how this order operates, regular reports to the Senate on how this order operates after each Senate estimates period, so we can reflect, observe and monitor how the implementation of this particular order is progressing as we move forward. And I think indeed those regular reports should perhaps be provided for a period of up to 5 years. And hopefully by then everybody understands what the requirements are, everybody understands that government should provide access to information, should provide access to documents, unless there is a recognised public interest ground as to why that should not be the case. And I'm sure that we would have significantly better government for it. Open government makes for better government. Secret government makes for bad government. And this government is a very, very secretive government, irrespective of what they tried to make people believe before the last election.